welcome to Can You Just Sit With Me? Where I discuss hope in grief, hope in the hard place, and hope during the challenging times of life. I am your host, Natasha Smith. Thanks so much for joining me today. All right, so today again, I'm excited to have Lauren of Grief in Texas with me. Lauren and I are a part of the same writing communities, and so we met there. And so I'm so looking forward to our conversation today on your books. Though I walk through the valley, 12 Days of Psalm 23, and your award-winning children's books. Where did my sweet grandpa go? Grandma Go, a preschooler's guide to losing a loved one, as well as Where Did My Sweet Grandpa Go? So, hi, Lauren.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad that you're here. And again, just wanted to welcome you to Can You Just Sit With Me? So we can kind of get started a little bit. If you would just share just a little bit about yourself, um, as well as about your grief story, and then we'll talk a little bit more about your books.
Okay, I lost my mom to early onset Alzheimer's disease. She was diagnosed a week after I graduated from college, already in the moderate stages of the disease. And then she died while in 2013, I was pregnant with my oldest daughter when we put her on hospice. And then she passed while I was pregnant with my youngest daughter. So I basically lost my mom while I was becoming a mom. And then my mom was an only child. And so I ended up taking care of her parents after she died. They had like vascular dementia caused by strokes, but they both were in their 90s when they died. But losing my mom was really, really hard on them. So I kind of had a double whammy with that one. And then
Right.
my grandfather died 3 years after my mom, and then my grandmother just passed like right before COVID hit.
So just a huge succession of loss. Just one loss after another.
Yes.
hmm So from that, because that's so because you've had recent, the most recent one was this year,
Well, last year. Yeah,
last year.
my grandmother was last year right before COVID hit. So
Okay. Now, have you were when did you first write your first book that was kind of on grief?
Where Did My Sweet Grandma Go was my first one.
hmm
And it started as a poem for my oldest daughter after my mom died. So she was 1.5 when my mom died, and I was pregnant with my second one. And then when she was about 3.5, she kept asking me all these questions about my mom. She liked to pick out my earrings every day at that time, and there was a pair of dragonfly earrings that had been my mother's that she was just obsessed with and wanted me to wear every day. And
hmm
so that's where some of our conversations would start about my mom. And she, we had photos of my mom. She could recognize her, but when you would ask her what did Grandma Dixie look like, she would say a pretty bird, like not joking, totally serious. A pretty bird. That's what she'd say every time. And so that sort of served as an inspiration for the book. It started as a poem, and then I read it to my mother-in-law, who was a first and second grade teacher for years.
hmm
And she said, "You have to publish this." And I thought, like make like a photo book for my kids or something, but it evolved. And I guess it took about 2 years in between writing the poem and actually publishing the book. But I was able to use a lot of my mother's artwork from like
Oh,
the 70s when she was in college. And then I filled in the rest with my own watercolors. It just kind of came together. Like there was art I didn't even know existed that
yeah.
went perfectly with pieces of the book. So,
hmm Gosh, that's such an amazing and beautiful story. And then just something again that leaves a beautiful legacy as well for your children now, and then even for, their children in the future, or just a beautiful legacy of your mom.
It's funny because my oldest was very much part of the process with the book. Like she was like I called her my artistic director because she'd be like, "No, I don't like that. You need to redo like on my watercolors." She had a lot of input on it, and so I think
Oh.
she really felt like part of that project. Well,
Mm-hmm.
now my youngest daughter, because she was like a baby at the time, now
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden she's like, "Why don't I have my own copies of the book? I need my own copies of your books." Like like, oh, like I didn't even think about the fact that she wasn't like in it like my oldest was. So
Mm-hmm.
she
Mm-hmm.
has kind of a different relationship to it. And then
Yeah.
of course they were older, they were old enough to remember more when my grandfather and my grandmother died.
Mm-hmm.
And so so my grandfather passed right after I published the grandma book.
Oh.
And people kept asking for a grandpa version. And so
Mm-hmm.
basically I the grandpa version is very similar to the grandma version,
Okay.
but I, redid the cover and changed it to be for grandfathers.
So how would you describe, like, kind of describing, or if when someone is sharing a loss with a child, like how what does that process look like?
To me, the most important piece is, I guess, modeling grief for your kids, showing
Mm-hmm.
them that negative emotions are normal, that that's a normal part of grief. I had sort of a bad grief experience when I was a kid. I was about 12, I think, and my dog died.
Mm-hmm.
And my grandmother was super uncomfortable with anyone crying.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were with my grandmother the weekend after my dog died, and my mom finally told me to stop crying, like yelled at me to stop crying. Um, it's not like a person died. Well, to a kid, the
Yeah.
dog is just like, it's like a sibling or a child.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I know that it was because of my grandmother that she did that, but um, I think that I had a lot of depression after that because I was suppressing those negative emotions that I was told that it wasn't okay to have those feelings. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think that's like the first really important piece with kids grieving is to make sure they know and model for them that it's okay to cry. It's okay to have, I mean, of course we have negative emotions when we lose something we loved. Like that's a
Yeah.
natural thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second thing is, really the point of my book is introducing this idea of eternal love and legacy that our love endures forever, even though the person has died, and kind of looking for, I guess, signs of the loved one's legacy all around us.
Mm-hmm.
I even have a parent's guide in there that has ideas for things that you can do together with the kids to honor the legacy of the loved one.
Mm-hmm. I love that so much. Just what you're saying about, modeling grief in front of our kids, because like literally until last year I would really try to hide hide my grief from the kids because I didn't want to quote unquote make them sad. And it really, what you said reminded me of that. Like I wrote a piece for her review just saying in 2020 I showed my kids that it was okay to cry, and that was like my first time really like bawling and sobbing in front of them. um, and it felt so good because I realized exactly what you're saying. It's like you should model, like it's okay to be sad. It's okay to show emotions. And then the reason why I was crying was because it was like it was my sister's birthday, and my sister had passed away, and I was sad that she wasn't there. And so I literally just explained that to them, and they were like so supportive.
Yeah.
And so it's just surprise. It's important, like you're saying here, to model grief with our kids, because where else will they learn it from, or it's better that they, learn it in a way from us, because we're becoming, more healthier people, that we can just pass along some things to them. But one thing that you said too was that kind of stuck out was kind of how we are shaped, like the way that we grieved are shaped by our environment, kind of.
Oh, yeah. Well, I
Hmm.
think there's a stigma around grief, just like around
Yeah,
mental health.
absolutely.
Um, like a generational, I mean, we're kind of seeing a shift in it now, but I think our parents' generation was taught to not cry in front of other people. I mean, I remember my mom struggled with depression when I was young, and I remember her crying in her walk-in closet.
Mhm.
I mean, that is really hard for a kid. Um, but that was the message she was taught by her mom, was that you don't cry in front of people. You don't have negative emotions. And I think that really screws up your mental health, when
It's
you have to
true.
hide negative emotions. So,
Hmm. Yep. And exactly your exact words, I think I had shared or spoke with. I don't know if if I published it yet, but talked with another guest, and we were just talking about the same thing. It's like grief is kind of viewed along the same lines as mental health. Like something is wrong with you if you're sad, something is wrong with you if you're sad for quote unquote too long, if
right.
you're grieving too long, and it's just like that's couldn't be far from the truth, because it's natural. So anyway, so that's why can you just sit with me? That's why I'm doing this podcast to kind of shed some more light on this and just be another voice to kind of put it out there.
Yeah, that whole idea of like a timeline for grief or needing
Yeah.
to move on from, I cannot tell you how many times I've heard well, aren't you ready to move on? Like, don't dwell on your grief.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, we don't want to get stuck wallowing,
Mm-hmm.
but grief is forever because love
Yeah.
is forever.
Yes, I love that, and that ties into what I love the point that you're saying about your book about introducing an eternal love. Like I love that so much. And then another thing that you say, and I think I quoted you somewhere because I love it, and you say the last stage of grief lasts forever.
Because the last stage is acceptance, right? I mean, if you look
Mm-hmm.
at like what is it, 7 stages of grief, or is
Mm-hmm.
it seven? I mean, that's all relative anyway, right? The
Yeah.
stages, but yeah, I mean, if the last stage is acceptance, then how does it ever end? Because
Mm-hmm.
you get to that point of acceptance, but it doesn't just make grief disappear.
Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
always part of you. It
Yep.
forever shapes who you are going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I was like, I said, you captured that so well, just because I've been studying a little bit on the stages, and you can, to me, you can throw those out the window. Sorry for
Well,
the people who
yeah.
designed them, um, but that statement just saying that the last stage just lasts forever is so true, and the reality of it is because it stays with us until we're no longer here on this earth. It stays with
Right.
us because we love those who we've lost. So I love how you put that so plainly. So you have the children's books, and then you also have the Though I Walk Through the Valley, the 12 Days of Psalms 23.
So it's a little devotional that you can actually write in. See, here's
Okay.
um, it has little places to answer prompts, but I basically set it up as it's a 12-day devotional. Like you can work through it in 12 days. I broke
Mhm.
Psalm 23 into 12 parts essentially. But in doing some research on Psalm 23, I found out that it is basically like a full year in the life of the shepherd. And so I
Oh,
kind of broke it into little seasons going through it. It was a fun little project, but it's for basically anyone struggling,
mhm.
grief or mental health, and just I guess that balance of grief and gratitude. The
Yeah.
uh, having gratitude that God is always good in any season, no matter how
Mhm.
difficult, that He doesn't change.
Mhm. I love that because I'm all about some tools to kind of go along with, what we're dealing with and what we're handling or trying to hold, um, and just trying to navigate through grief and hard times and challenging times. So I love that this is a tool that can be used for, like you said, not only those who are grieving or going through mental health ish things, but it can just someone who's going through a hard time. So they can use the devotional as well.
It's definitely short and sweet, but I kind of
Mhm.
wanted it that way because
Yeah,
when you're in something, you you don't want to commit to some huge project of reading and response. So it's
that's so
something you can work through quickly.
yes, and definitely note it because that is so true. So I love that too. So what are some things I kind of want to touch a little bit? So we kind of talked about a little bit of your story and your books, but for you as a person, like how have you navigated through the grief?
It looks a little different in each
Hmm.
season. Like I've written some lately about how the holidays
Yeah.
um, make, I don't know, they just bring feelings up that you haven't dealt with in a while. It's weird as my kids get older, seeing the different things that I feel like my mom should be there for.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, I have gratitude for all the things from my childhood
Hmm.
that she did well. We all make mistakes in parenting and are products of our raising, but
Hmm.
she loved me well. She made a lot of sacrifices for my brother and I. And I mean, there are there are so many people who didn't ever have that. Like even if their
That's
mom's
true.
still alive.
Hmm.
So becoming a parent has given me a lot of gratitude for having the mom I did as long as I did.
Hmm.
But I still, that other side is still the grief for the things that she's missing out on now with my kids and basically being a grandmother. Um, so I don't know. It's a double-edged sword. I do think I think losing my mom sort of young gave me this sense of urgency
Yeah.
where there's all these things I want to accomplish before it's too late.
Hmm.
And I guess that's like I've always struggled with anxiety, but then there's a grief anxiety too, where you're worried that something bad's gonna happen or somebody's gonna die
Hmm.
because you've experienced that trauma.
Yeah.
So I think having that loss makes me more grateful and more appreciative of all the time I have with my kids.
Hmm.
But I also, my kids were around nursing homes and memory care facilities and stuff.
Yeah.
With my oldest a little bit with my mom, and then both of them with my grandparents. To where I think caregiving and grief has been sort of normalized for my kids, where they
Hmm.
won't necessarily have the fear and stigma surrounding that as they get older.
Yeah. I hadn't thought about that because it's kind of the same with my kids as well. Just them walking through it with me, but of course from a different angle because it was my sisters and then my dad, but because they were so young, and then I was like a stay-at-home mom, so they would go with me to like you said, the care facilities, and then at the end like hospice, which they thought was like a nice a nice facility. So
Yeah.
it's like, okay. But yeah, so maybe. maybe, I don't know, like you
Well,
said,
we
with,
fear things we don't know, right?
yeah,
So,
yes, that's good. Hmm. Yeah.
I didn't know anything about Alzheimer's when my mom was diagnosed. Like, I had a
Hmm.
lot of fear around that. The
Yeah.
only experience I'd had with that was when I was in Girl Scouts, when like fourth grade, and we met at a nursing home,
Hmm.
and a lady who had Alzheimer's, they'll just like pick up stuff because they don't know it's not theirs. She
Right.
picked up my Girl Scout books, and we ended up having
Mm.
to go to her room and get them out of the foot locker at the end of her bed.
Mm.
And I just remember being so confused by that
Yeah.
experience because nobody really took the time to talk to me about what Alzheimer's was or what. Um, and I think my kids aren't going to have the same kind of fear around dementia and um, caregiving and hospice and
Hmm.
death
Yeah.
that I did.
Yeah. Same. So it still kind of goes back to what you said at the beginning a little bit with just um, the modeling of grief, even though sometimes I know for me, I feel like it's not all intentional, but because I'm just having to walk through some things, but modeling grief in a way that will be helpful for them in the future.
I think it's just being honest,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah. That's good. Yeah.
I
Hmm.
mean, we have to be age appropriate in our
Yeah.
explanations and answers
Yeah.
to questions, but
Hmm.
it's just being honest and not
Yeah.
hiding the truth of our experience from them.
Hmm. That's good. All right. Jotting down a few things, but yeah, so good.
I know, it's like if I don't write it down, I may not remember it later.
So what are some things that you would like to leave with the audience, or like when they come across your work and your writing, what do you want them to kind of take away from it?
I feel like this is ever evolving for me,
Hmm.
but my kind of takeaway right now is just that grief is love.
Mm, yeah.
And that pretty much says it all.
Hmm. I love that. Of course. Yeah. Grief is love. The Like I said, the couple of the children's books, and then you have the devotional.
You can get all three of my books on Amazon and barnesandnoble.com. Oh, and I was gonna say, and my website, and I guess you can find all my stuff through my website, is laurenflake.com.
Okay. And is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we go?
I guess just be really gentle with yourself because man, stuff will just hit you that you did not see coming.
Hmm.
Um, there's just so many little memory triggers,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
don't. It's okay to say no
Yeah. That's
to
good.
obligations.
Yes. That's a big one. So that's good. So it's okay to say no and just being gentle with yourself. That's one thing that I'm realizing just throughout the year. I'm like, oh my gosh, just so many triggers that I wouldn't have thought would be a trigger, that nobody's ever really told me or talked about. So
Right.
that's been interesting. But I enjoyed this chat with you, Lauren, and just looking forward to picking up these resources for myself, especially the devotional, and and again, just being able to share the children's books with everyone, to be able to use those as a resource as well.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And
Can't wait to listen to all of your podcasts.
yay! And I do enjoy following you as well on your page. Thanks again so much for joining me today. Can you just sit with me?
Same to you. Bye.
Okay, thanks so much, Lauren. That brings me to the end of this episode. Thanks again for joining me, and thanks for listening to Can You Just Sit With Me? If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and be sure to come back for my next episode of Can You Just Sit With Me? Until then, this is Natasha Smith, helping you to find hope in grief, hope in the hard place, and hope in the challenging times of life. Be sure to connect with me across social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at I'm Natasha Smith.